Hello and welcome to a thankfully catsuit-free review of The Legacy of Heorot, a novel by the triumvirate of Larry Niven, Jerry Pournelle and Stephen Barnes. This 1987 book follows the attempt to initiate a colony on the remote planet of Tau Ceti 4. This is part The Martian, part Predator, with a little dash of aliens and Thing and a bit of a dollop of Beowulf thrown in. The story starts with the head of security, Cadmann Weyland, and biologist Sylvia Faulkner exploring the island they've established their first base on. The local fauna are limited to harmless but edible fish they call salmon because of their similarity to salmon, and winged flying creatures they call pterodons. The only hint that things are not quite right is that some of the colonists, frozen for the journey, have thawed out with just a little bit of brain damage. They function well enough as humans, but the specialities that they were employed on this mission for are in some cases forgotten. Nonetheless, the colony has been making great strides, and the consensus is that Cadmann, the lone soldier in the group, is not required anymore, and his attempts to make the camp overprotected simply seem like crazy to the others. In fact, the base has that feel of a circus until a dog goes missing, and shortly after that the blood of 2 chickens is found, and again the consensus is that Cadmann has fabricated this, that he's responsible for those trying to make the group more wary and bolster his standing. Even when something attacks the calves that they've been breeding, the group consensus is still that Cadmann is the one responsible. Things are not helped by the toxic relationships in among the colonists, with Cadmann's obvious crush on Sylvia, her husband's resentment of it, and Marianne's affection for Cadmann, and the serial womanizer Carlos, all exacerbating the situation. Cadmann and Ernst build a blind in the nearby undergrowth, believing that there is a predator and hoping to observe and then catch or kill it. However, it turns out to be a far wilder, bigger and more aggressive beast than they thought, and it smashes through the blind even after they open fire on it. Ernst is killed and Cadmann lucky to survive. The hurt animal returns to their camp and causes havoc, killing 12 of the colonists before it is, in turn, killed. Although the repentant colonists are eager to make amends, the slighted Cadmann heads up into the mountains to build his own outpost. He's joined by Mary Ann, and eventually the two become a couple, and relations with the colonies begin to thaw. Unfortunately for all of them, the predator, now called a Grendel because Cadmann returned from his hunt with a sizable part of the beast, it has a stronger mother, and after she also attacks the colonists and then is also killed, they learn a little bit more about the animal's life cycle and are able to hunt down the other half dozen or so on the island without any great scream and shout. And it's about now that they discover that they have to face an entirely different problem, this one of their own making. The harmless salmon that they've been snacking on are in fact the early stage of the Grendel's life cycle, and the salmon's only significant predator on the island is the adult Grendels. The colonists, having just removed all of the adult Grendels, have in doing so caused a population explosion in Grendels. Instead of being home to half a dozen, the island is about to be swamped under 1,000, and it's down to Cadmann to come up with a plan and do something to save the colony. As a character, Cadmann feels like something from another era. He's that sort of resourceful go-getter, slinging a gun over his shoulder, heading out into the wilds and returning with furs for his tribe. He apparently is one of the untouched. His faculties are strong on Tau Ceti 4 as they were on Earth, perhaps because his faculties always relied on brawn as much as brains. Perhaps not. Regardless, he is aloof and apart from his peers from the off, far older than Sylvia, the object of his affections, and generally poorly regarded even among the faded intellectuals. They were not among the first ones. Everyone on Avalon was equal, but some were more equal than others. The first ones had landed 4 months earlier and had social status. At least those who hadn't wasted time and effort building needless fences and minefields had status. Cadmann was one of the first ones, the first group who arrived on the planet and helped as they chose a location, ensured it was safe, and went about building a base for the others. This role has given them higher status, but the peaceful location has made Cadmann effectively redundant and reduced to a participant role in work led by the others. It is irreconcilable to him. Times like these confused him. It was a fight not to shut down his thoughts and find some project totally involving and preferably a little risky. When Sylvia's husband Terry interrupts his attending to a security concern, Cadmann can't help but compare himself against his younger rival. Did you ever recover from puberty? What if I throw you in the creek? Cadmann is the alpha male, the most capable of his peers. He can survive without them, and though they don't realise it yet, they actually can't survive without him. Despite this, he is the object of scorn, and because of this, he is the object of resentment and derision, some of which he does bring on himself because he's not the most likeable of characters. In fact, he's the sort of person that feels the need to correct his friend's faux Spanish. But as an atavistic figure among the future, he stands out like he would have to a certain extent in 1987 when his peers in the popular literature of the year would have included the far more metropolitan Jack Ryan or Paul Sheldon. While Beowulf was eventually abandoned by all but one of his warriors in the final battle, here Cadmann's force of personality and his penchant for violence rallies even the most reluctant to his cause. Zack, the camp's appointed leader, acknowledges that Cadmann could take that leadership at will. Terry Faulkner, Sylvia's husband, remember, is crippled from the waist down in the first Grendel attack. Unable to satisfy his wife and recognising her future infidelity as likely, he instigates a no Cadmann rule. Sylvia's appointed lover, though, Carlos, acknowledges Cadmann's capabilities. Virtues of the warrior since ancient times, protection of the innocent, courage in battle, the greatest of them all was loyalty to the king. As the final attack of the Grendels grows in likeliness, even Cadmann's antagonist Terry resigns himself to his fate and acknowledges Cadmann's status as de facto alpha. Cadmann, earlier, after musing on the importance of the incorruptible genes of the hibernation-damaged colonists, looked at Sylvia and Terry's child alongside his own child by Marianne. He busts Jessica and Justin as if both were his own children, and if there were any justice in the world, they would be. However, to consider that justice, we need to consider that Cadmann himself is worthy of the two women, Sylvia and Marianne, while Terry, with his inferior genes, is worthy of none. It's social Darwinism at its most naked. Even as his death approaches, Terry's bitterness remains, and he refuses to release Sylvia from her promise not to sleep with Cadmann, and then he dies, lamenting his own emasculation. A year of calm, 2 years, and we'd have rebuilt all the hospital stuff. I'd have new legs and a working prick. Now, that seems like a kind of pathetic thing to be worrying about a second before your doom. It is in keeping with the colonists, who generally behave like a pack of animals. Hormones are out of control in the camp, perhaps attributable to hibernation-induced regression. Perhaps even these people were, in part, chosen for having these urges. The ultimate goal, after all, is to populate this planet. Almost everybody on the planet is given a particularly modest and middle-class name. Along with the Sylvia, there's a Phyllis, Carolyn and Jean. Stuart Ellington, Mary Ann is actually Mary Ann Eisenhower. Those characters who exist to bring an international flair like Carlos, Ernst and Bobby Kanagawa, they're still all PhDs. You'd think that all of them would be too middle-class and too busy even for sex, but they are in fact constantly breeding or thinking about it. Sylvia, Cadmann's crush, is pregnant with Terry's baby, but Cadmann doesn't care. Her pregnancy changed nothing. Nor does he concern himself with the 4 or 5 women who had made their intentions clear. The activities of these learned doctors and assorted geniuses does them little moral credit. The party on the beach is, in true Beowulf style, characterised by noise and drunkenness with little consideration given to the consequences of their lack of care. Ernst and LaDonna stood up from where they'd been eating, hurled turkey bones into the dark. Way to look after a new planet. The jeep slewed around in a tight circle so quickly that only the ballast of several enthusiastically inebriated colonists kept it from tipping over on 2 wheels. And while Joe is not alone in hungering after the women, his wife is only a week removed from giving birth. These are humanity's best and brightest, selected from over 40 million university graduates, yet their behaviour is consistently licentious, thoughtless and uncaring. It's attributable to the selection process, perhaps to the hibernation and thawing process even, but what it does is it introduces an element of doubt around Cadmann's behaviour and his insistence that he is one of the few untouched by the illness. This element of mistrust is quite important to the first act, but for me, I didn't really feel like they'd made enough of it. To be clear here, the first act, for me, was a string of really great scenes. It sets up the environment and characters well, and then when Cadmann is isolated, it gets very tense. The way the animals react one by one to an unseen presence is the sort of thing that lesser horror writers wish they could do. First the cows, then the horses, and then the dogs. What in the hell was going on? He looked back at the animal pens. The German shepherds, dogs bred for their loyalty and intelligence, were going berserk. The wildest of them all was the eldest, a nearly full-sized bitch who was actually biting at the electrified fence, touching it and recoiling, returning again and again. This animal frenzy is just great at creating this feeling of fear. The best of these clever and brave guard dogs is furiously trying over and over to free herself, to get away from whatever lurks in the pools of darkness. Even the presence of the warrior Cadmann does little to calm them. She came to him slowly and stood trembling, panting, eyes fixed and staring out into the darkness. Using animals in this way is great for building up tension. You could think about the cat Jones in the first Alien movie. We all associate heightened senses, even perhaps a sixth sense for danger, with animals. And as we like and trust them, then instinctively, when the characters go against their associated wisdom, it creates this dramatic irony, and with each additional reaction that the tension is raised a step at a time. It's absolutely the stuff of horror and monster stories, whether they're told in movies or books, and here it is done superbly. This scene also sows the first seeds of doubt about Cadmann as he faces his first real security threat without his equipment. Never go out into the dark without a flashlight. Rule 1, and I forgot. And he's also dragged away from this by his urge to join the party and indulge his libido. The only slight downside is, as the threat builds, there are barbs thrown at Cadmann, with the colonists claiming that he's fabricated this situation in order to bolster his position. But while their disbelief seems a little far-fetched as the animals die, it never builds up into a situation that threatens him convincingly. Even in the early stages, he's far too competent and strong to feel threatened by exile or punishment. It's a minor thing in a blistering first act in which the undeniable highlight is the Grendel's rampage through Cadmann's hide and then through the base. The authors really capture and relate the panic, chaos and destruction that follows. The battle with the second monster, again caused by colonial idiocy, is a shorter affair. While Beowulf had a greater challenge with Grendel's mother, Cadmann brings the full weight of the colony and its technology, and here the threat lessens. It's rather like Alien in reverse, when the increasingly powerful alien becomes a bigger threat, but here the second larger Grendel is killed fairly simply in comparison to the first. The threat to Bobby and Carlos in the initial stages of this scene is well done, but when the humans become hunter and not hunted, things are a lot less exciting. The final battle with the island stormed by thousands of mini-Grendels is slightly disappointing when put against the strength of the opening. The Grendels are as much threat to each other, thinning their own numbers immediately, and though we are promised that this will lead to the strongest and most dangerous Grendels being the ultimate survivors, they never evolve into anything more than cannon fodder. Here again we see Cadmann as the modern warrior, laying traps, moving resources and weaponry to where it's needed the most. The modern warrior then relies on technology and brains rather than brute strength, reaffirming Cadmann's place in this most modern of worlds. The plot, as suggested by the title, borrows heavily from Beowulf, even going so far as to call the second beast Mama, even though the relationship between the two beasts is not parental. The three-beast structure remains Grendel, Mother, Dragon, but here the stakes isn't elevated by the increasing size of the monster as much as by the number of monsters, nor does the last fight take place with our heroic stand-in Cadmann in his old age. Though, despite the three trials of the story, the novel signs off with the older but no wiser Cadmann heading out to explore some more of their new world. While Marianne muses on the possibility of a dragon out there in the unexplored, the narrator signs off with perhaps, just perhaps, there was no dragon after all. The variation from the myth, despite the cop-out last line, is otherwise welcome. The future setting and its expansion work generally. I've mentioned that the general horniness of the colonists can be understood in the circumstances, but it remains the weakest part of the story, which works generally, even if perhaps the relative strength of the three beasts inverts the expected three-act progression. I'm intrigued by the writing process here. Three credited authors seems like it might, in certain circumstances, be perhaps as many as two too many? Did they write sections each or chapters each, or all contribute equally in redrafts? I wonder, because there is two distinct styles in the text. Sometimes it appears to be more, I guess, poetic than in the others, and not just in the quoting of people like Kipling and Shakespeare and Blake at the top of each chapter. It is the author that wrote this: "The jagged shape of Muckingrake Mountain rose like a primordial cairn, a titanic mass of unweathered rocks stacked as if by Neolithic ritual, towering, raw-edged, lost in the clouds that shrouded the plateau." The same person that gives us this. The searchlight danced further out, to the outpost perimeter 50 metres away. Dark shapes were piled there. A dozen or more Grendels had flung themselves into the steel-charged fence. Electricity sizzled deep within the pile, but other Grendels climbed over the stack of corpses. Still more used their tails to drag dead siblings away from the fence. A scene from the Inferno, amigo. I think if you're going to compare this to the Inferno, then you have to give us more than this fairly lifeless effort, because it doesn't really capture any sense of fear or terror, I don't think. Now, it may simply be that this is the same author, and towards the end they're just running out of steam, because we also start to get a little bit of repetition and creeping in as well. Here you have the narrator and a character echoing each other, which is only a good idea in a first-person narrative, which this is not. I'd say only about half of them are reacting to it, but they set the others off. We're going to lose about 2/3 of them in an orgy of murder. Grendel seethed in an orgy of murder. Some of the warier Grendels had sprinted away from the water. You also get this repetition 3 times on the same page, which sucks tension out of an otherwise good scene where Cadmann and Carlos rush to help the trapped Hendrik. His thoughts wandered. Should he have taken off? Should he have stayed on the ground with the unseen monsters batting at the thin metal hull? Things battered at the hull, the skeeter rang with the blows, and Hendrik screamed. 6 of the monsters must be batting at his door. He could hear them and feel the impact in his bones. In conclusion, this is a novel that generally works well. A spectacular first act, perhaps setting too high a bar for the rest of the novel to live up to. The first Grendel causes carnage and is incredibly hard to kill. The following monsters are far easier to kill, and that is in part due to the humans reacting and planning for the eventuality, but it also negates the threat of the beasts when the expectation would be that the threat level rises. The Legacy of Heorot, though, is good even in the moments when its standards slip a touch. The story has something to say on the idea of man and the consequences of colonisation. The characters, their quirks, largely explainable by plot and circumstances. They're a strange bunch and not particularly pleasant. Sylvia's cheating on her husband and the general acceptance of such relationships makes this feel like a 2020s novel rather than one from 1987. The intertextuality and obvious parallels with sci-fi greats like Alien and The Thing, the former better handled than the latter, they all give the story gravitas and genre credibility. If things had elevated or even enlarged on the excitement and the impetus of the first act, this would be a classic. Though it doesn't, it is still very easy to recommend, so check it out if you can. His attempts to make the camp overprotected simply seem like crazy to the others. In fact, the base has that feel of a circus until a dog goes missing. Things are not helped by the toxic relationships in among the colonists, with Cadmann's obvious crush on Sylvia, her husband's resentment of it, and Marianne's affection for Cadmann, and the serial womanizer Carlos. Ernst is killed, and Cadmann lucky to survive the beast. It has a stronger mother, and after she also attacks the colonists and are able to hunt down the other 6 or so on the island without any great scream and shout. And it's down to Cadmann to come up with a plan and do something to save the colony. Thanks for watching this far. If you like this video, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.